The night cycle aboard the orbital station was never truly silent. Even in the quieter hours, the structure murmured with the distant vibration of engines, the faint pulse of shield generators, and the occasional echo of footsteps traveling along long metallic corridors. Artificial gravity held steady, lights dimmed to a soft blue meant to imitate the calm of evening, though few soldiers ever noticed such details. Kyreth moved through the corridor with measured, precise steps. Her tall figure cast a long shadow along the wall panels, and the faint glow of passing status lights reflected off the dark fabric of her uniform. Her long ears, angled slightly backward in quiet concentration, gave her silhouette an unmistakable elegance, though most who saw her thought first of her reputation rather than her appearance. Among both alien and human units, she was known simply as the quiet one who never missed. She had just left a late tactical briefing that had stretched far longer than necessary. Humans, she had learned, were very fond of discussing possibilities long after the most efficient solution was already obvious. One officer had spent 12 minutes debating whether a corridor should be classified as narrow or moderately narrow, a distinction Kyreth suspected would matter very little to anyone being shot at inside it. She turned a corner, her thoughts still occupied with that memory, and walked down a corridor she did not usually use. The door panels here were identical to those in her own sector, numbered in the same small glowing script. Without thinking, she approached one, pressed her access pad and stepped inside. The door slid shut behind her with a quiet hiss. Kyreth stopped. The room was wrong. Not wrong in a tactical sense. There were no threats, no weapons aimed at her, no alarms sounding, but everything else was unfamiliar in a way that unsettled her more than danger ever had. The walls were not bare metal. They were covered with projected images, mountain ranges beneath unfamiliar skies, oceans reflecting pale sunlight, cities filled with lights that shimmered like constellations. A narrow shelf along one wall held rows of physical books, their worn edges suggesting they had been opened many times. A small device on a desk emitted soft instrumental music, so quiet it was almost part of the air itself. And in the middle of the room stood a human. He stared at her, frozen in the act of setting down a mug. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the human cleared his throat. "I'm going to guess you're not here for a routine inspection." Kyreth blinked once. "No." The human tilted his head slightly. "Because if you were, I feel like someone would have warned me that an elite alien warrior might appear in my doorway at midnight. I appear to have entered the wrong quarters," Kyreth said calmly. "That does happen," the human replied. "Usually not quite this dramatically, but still." Kyreth inclined her head slightly. "I will leave immediately." She turned toward the door but paused. Her gaze drifted again across the room, lingering on the books, the images, the faint glow of the desk lamp. There was a warmth here she could not name, a sense of life that felt strangely quiet. The human noticed her hesitation. "You can look if you want," he said. "I promise none of it bites." Kyreth looked back at him. "Bites?" "Figure of speech," he said quickly. "Human expression means it's harmless." "I see." She stepped a little farther into the room, her movements cautious but not tense, like someone exploring unfamiliar terrain. She stopped near the shelf of books, studying the titles. Some were printed in human languages she recognized. Others were translated into the station's shared script. "You read these?" she asked. "Sometimes," the human said. "When I'm not saving civilization or arguing about corridor widths." Kyreth turned, surprised. "You were present at that briefing." "Communication support," he said. "Private Marcus Hale." "Kyreth." "I know," Marcus said. "Hard not to." There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet amusement, as if her reputation were simply another piece of information rather than something intimidating. That more than anything caught her attention. She picked up one of the books carefully, as if it were a delicate instrument. "These contain stories." "Most of them," Marcus said. "Some are history, some are philosophy, some are just people trying to explain the universe and mostly failing." "Why keep them here?" Marcus leaned back against his desk. "Because they remind me there's more to life than drills and patrol schedules." Kyreth considered this. A soldier's purpose is to fight. That's part of it, Marcus said. But if that's all we are, then what exactly are we protecting? Kyreth did not answer immediately. The question settled in her thoughts like a stone dropped into still water, sending slow, widening ripples. The music shifted slightly, a gentle change in melody. Kyreth listened, her ears tilting faintly forward. What is this sound? Piano, Marcus said. An instrument, very old, very human. It is calming. That's the idea. Silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. Kyreth found herself sitting in a chair near the desk, without quite deciding to do so. Marcus returned to his mug, sipping something that released a faint scent of herbs. What is that? She asked. Tea. Kyreth studied the liquid. Is it effective? At what? Improving combat readiness. Marcus blinked, then laughed. No, but it's excellent for improving patience, which might be even more useful. Kyreth considered this seriously, which only made Marcus laugh harder. Time passed without either of them noticing. They spoke of small things at first, the station, the difficulty of sleeping during artificial night cycles, the peculiar way humans insisted on decorating their spaces. Marcus explained why one of the projected images showed a forest on Earth, and Kyreth listened with quiet fascination as he described wind moving through trees, a sound she had never heard in person. Eventually, Marcus glanced at the time display on the wall and raised his eyebrows. It's later than I thought. Kyreth followed his gaze. Several hours had passed. You should probably get some rest, Marcus said gently. Elite warriors need sleep too, I assume. Kyreth stood, though more slowly than she had intended. She walked to the door, then paused, her hand resting on the control panel. For a moment she did not move. This room, with its quiet music and scattered books and soft light, felt unlike any place she had known in decades of service. It was not efficient. It was not orderly. It was not designed for war. And yet, for reasons she did not fully understand, it felt peaceful. She turned back slightly. Private Marcus. Yes? I may return to borrow one of these books. Marcus smiled faintly. You'd be welcome. Kyreth inclined her head once, then stepped into the corridor. The door slid shut behind her, leaving the quiet hum of the station around her once more. But as she walked back toward her own quarters, she realized something unusual. For the first time in many years, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Kyreth returned to her own quarters that night, yet the room felt different than it had the evening before. Nothing had changed. The walls were still bare alloy, the lighting perfectly calibrated, the furnishings minimal and precise. Everything was exactly as a warrior's space was meant to be. Functional, orderly, silent, and unbearably empty. She stood for a long moment in the center of the room, listening to the faint vibration of the station beyond the walls. Her mind, trained for decades to replay battle simulations and tactical scenarios, instead replayed the quiet melody she had heard in Marcus's quarters, the sound of pages turning, the faint scent of tea. Kyreth sat on the narrow bed and picked up the small data slate that contained her training logs. She activated it, stared at the glowing text for several seconds, then powered it down again. For the first time in years, reviewing combat drills felt strangely unimportant. The next evening, she told herself she would simply borrow a book, nothing more. That was a reasonable, efficient purpose. Warriors were allowed to study. She arrived at Marcus's door precisely at the same hour she had entered by accident the night before. This time she hesitated, then pressed the chime. There was a brief clatter from inside, followed by Marcus's voice. 1 second. Don't open. The door slid open automatically before he finished speaking. Marcus stood in the middle of the room holding what appeared to be a half-folded piece of clothing, looking mildly horrified. I was reorganizing, he said quickly. Kyreth glanced at the scattered items on the bed, then back at him. It appears you were losing a battle, Marcus sighed. Laundry is humanity's greatest enemy. Entire civilizations have probably fallen because someone refused to fold their shirts. Kyreth tilted her head slightly. That seems statistically unlikely. You've never met my roommate back on Earth, Marcus said. She stepped inside and Marcus hurried to clear a chair. The music was playing again, softer than before, and one of the projected landscapes showed a storm rolling across a distant sea, lightning flickering silently in the clouds. Kyreth's gaze lingered on it. Is this real? It was, Marcus said. Recorded years ago. I like the sound of rain, but the station doesn't exactly provide weather. Kyreth listened. Faintly beneath the music, the recording carried the distant rumble of thunder. She felt an unfamiliar sense of calm settle over her thoughts, as if the sound smoothed the sharp edges of her mind. You came for a book? Marcus asked. Yes. He gestured toward the shelf. Choose carefully. Some of those are dangerous. Dangerous? One of them made me stay awake until 3 in the morning. Completely ruined my sleep cycle. Kyreth examined the titles, eventually selecting a small volume. This one. Marcus leaned over to read the spine. Poetry, he said. Bold choice. I am unfamiliar with this form. It's like condensed thinking, Marcus said, or condensed feeling, depending on who you ask. Kyreth opened the book, scanning a page silently. Her brow furrowed slightly. These sentences are incomplete. That's part of the art. They do not explain their meaning. That's also part of the art. Kyreth closed the book slowly. Humans are inefficient communicators. Marcus laughed. You're not wrong. They sat for a while, Marcus drinking tea and Kyreth turning pages with careful precision. Occasionally she asked a question about a phrase or image, and Marcus tried to explain, though sometimes he admitted he wasn't entirely sure himself. At one point, Kyreth looked up from the book. This poem describes silence as if it were alive. Marcus nodded. Sometimes it feels that way. Kyreth considered this, then said quietly, in battle, silence usually means something is about to go wrong. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Maybe that's why humans like peaceful silence so much. It feels like stealing something back. The words lingered between them. A faint vibration ran through the station as a transport vessel docked somewhere in the distance, the structure humming briefly before settling again. The projected storm shifted, lightning illuminating the waves in slow motion. Marcus broke the quiet. So what's it like? Being you, I mean. Kyreth looked at him. Clarify. Being the person everyone expects to be perfect, Marcus said. The calm warrior who never hesitates. Kyreth was silent for a long moment. It is efficient, she said finally. That doesn't answer the question. Kyreth looked down at the open book in her hands. It is. Quiet, she said at last. But not like this. Marcus didn't press further. Instead, he reached over and adjusted the music, letting the piano grow slightly louder. After a while, he stood and walked to a small container on the counter. Tea? He offered. Kyreth hesitated. Will it improve patience? Marcus smiled. Only one way to find out. She accepted the cup, holding it carefully. The warmth seeped into her hands, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. She took a cautious sip, then another. Well? Marcus asked. It is acceptable, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. High praise. They talked for hours again, though the conversation wandered in unexpected directions. Marcus attempted to explain humor from Earth, which Kyreth analyzed as if it were a tactical puzzle, often identifying the structure of a joke, but missing why it was amusing. At one point, Marcus told a story about a training drone that had malfunctioned and begun following a commander everywhere, loudly announcing target locked every 5 minutes. Kyreth listened carefully, then said, why did they not simply deactivate it? They tried, it outranked them. Kyreth stared at him for several seconds before realizing he was joking. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her expression. The station clock shifted into the later hours again, though neither of them noticed until Marcus glanced at the display and exhaled softly. We did it again. Yes, Kyreth said. You should probably get some rest, he said. I don't want to be responsible for an elite warrior falling asleep during a briefing. That would be inefficient, Kyreth agreed, setting the empty cup down. She stood holding the book. At the door she paused just as she had the night before. Private Marcus, she said. Yeah? I will return this when I have finished. No rush, he said. Poetry tends to take its time. Kyreth inclined her head and stepped into the corridor once more. The door slid shut behind her, But this time the silence of the hallway felt less oppressive, as if some small part of the warmth from that room followed her into the vastness of the station. And as she walked back toward her quarters, she found herself wondering, not about tactics, not about drills, but about the meaning of a single unfinished line in a human poem. Kyreth finished the book 2 days later, though finished did not feel like the correct word. Poetry, she had discovered, did not end in the way tactical briefings ended. The last page did not conclude anything. It merely stopped speaking, leaving the reader alone with thoughts that continued moving long after the text was gone. She found herself reading certain lines repeatedly, trying to understand why a few simple words could create such a lingering sense of meaning. Once she even realized she had been staring at the same page for nearly 20 minutes without turning it. This disturbed her slightly. She was not accustomed to losing track of time without noticing. On the third evening, she stood outside Marcus's quarters again. This time she did not hesitate before pressing the chime. "Come in," Marcus called from inside. The door slid open, and Kyreth stepped into the familiar warmth of the room. The projected landscape showed a wide desert beneath a violet sky, twin moons rising slowly over distant dunes. Soft music drifted through the air again, though she noticed it was a different melody than before, slower, almost contemplative. Marcus looked up from a small device on his desk. "Finished already?" "Yes," Kyreth said, holding out the book. "And?" Kyreth considered. "It is inefficient," she said, "and yet effective." Marcus laughed softly. "That's poetry in a sentence." She placed the book carefully back on the shelf, her gaze lingering there for a moment. Then she turned. "Do you have another?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're asking for more?" "Yes." He walked to the shelf, scanning the titles. "All right," he said, "but this one isn't poetry. It's a collection of short stories. Science fiction, actually." Kyreth tilted her head slightly. "Fiction about science. Or science about fiction," Marcus said. "Depends who you ask." She accepted the book and sat down in the chair near the desk. Marcus poured himself tea, then leaned back, watching her read the first page. The quiet settled naturally around them, comfortable and unforced. After a while, Marcus spoke. "So, I've been wondering something." Kyreth looked up. "Ask. Do your people have stories?" Kyreth was silent for a moment. "Yes," she said, "but they are not like these." "How so?" "They are accounts of battles," she said. "Strategies, victories, losses, lessons to be remembered." Marcus nodded slowly. "No stories about ordinary life?" Kyreth shook her head. "Ordinary life is not considered worthy of record." Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. "That sounds exhausting." Kyreth blinked. "Exhausting?" "Living as if every moment has to be important," Marcus said. "Humans are experts at wasting time on things that don't matter. It's one of our finest qualities." Kyreth studied him, uncertain whether he was serious. Marcus smiled faintly, and she realized he was, in his own way. She returned to the book, reading quietly. After several minutes, she said, "This story describes a ship capable of folding space without engines." Marcus leaned forward. "Ah, theoretical compression drives. Engineers argue about those constantly." "Is it possible?" "Maybe someday," Marcus said. "Though if someone invents it, I hope they also invent chairs that don't make your back hurt during long jumps." Kyreth glanced at the chair she was sitting in. "This chair is acceptable." "That's because you sit like someone who expects to be attacked at any moment," Marcus said. "That is a reasonable expectation." Marcus chuckled. "Fair point." Time passed again in quiet conversation. Kyreth found herself asking questions not only about the book, but about small details of Marcus's life. What Earth looked like from orbit. What food tasted like in different regions. Why humans placed images of places they were not currently in on their walls. "So you display landscapes to remind yourselves of what you are not experiencing," she said. Marcus nodded. "Pretty much." Kyreth considered this. "That seems melancholy." "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but also comforting." A faint vibration passed through the station as a patrol cruiser departed from a nearby dock. The hum of the engines resonated through the structure, low and steady, like distant thunder. Kyreth listened, then said quietly, "I used to sleep in engine rooms during long deployments." Marcus looked surprised. "Why?" "The sound was constant," she said. "It prevented dreams." Marcus frowned slightly. "You don't like dreams?" Kyreth looked down at the open book in her hands. "They are inefficient," she said. Marcus did not reply, but his expression softened in a way that made Kyreth uncomfortable. Not because it was unpleasant, but because it felt like he understood something she had not intended to reveal. To change the subject, Marcus reached into a drawer and pulled out a small deck of cards. "Want to try something?" Kyreth looked at the cards. "Explain." "It's a game," Marcus said. "Simple rules. Mostly luck." Kyreth watched as he shuffled the deck, the cards moving quickly between his fingers. "Luck is an unreliable variable," she said. "Exactly," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it fun." He dealt the cards and explained the rules. Kyreth listened carefully, absorbing every detail with the same focus she would give a tactical briefing. They began to play. 10 minutes later, Marcus stared at the table. "You've won every round." "The probabilities are straightforward," Kyreth said. Marcus sighed. "I regret introducing this game. You may stop playing." "No," Marcus said stubbornly. "I refuse to be defeated by statistics." They played several more rounds. Marcus lost each one. At last, he leaned back in his chair. "All right, new rule. You're not allowed to calculate probabilities." Kyreth looked puzzled. "That is not possible." "Then you're banned from card games forever." Kyreth considered this seriously. "That seems excessive." Marcus laughed, and to his surprise, Kyreth's lips curved slightly in what was unmistakably a small smile. The station clock shifted into the late cycle again, before either of them noticed. Marcus glanced at the display and shook his head. "We keep doing this." "Yes," Kyreth said. Neither of them moved immediately. At last, Kyreth closed the book and stood. She walked to the door, then paused, her hand resting on the panel as before. "Private Marcus," she said. "Yeah?" "I will return tomorrow." Marcus nodded. "I'll make more tea." Kyreth inclined her head once and stepped into the corridor. The door slid shut behind her, and she began walking back toward her own quarters. But this time, as she moved through the quiet, blue-lit halls of the station, she noticed something she had not noticed before. The corridors did not feel as long as they once had. Kyreth began to notice changes long before anyone else did. They were small at first, subtle enough that even she might have ignored them months earlier. The way her shoulders relaxed when she stepped into Marcus's quarters. The way her thoughts slowed, no longer racing ahead to calculate probabilities or anticipate threats. The way silence in that room felt different from silence anywhere else. She arrived one evening carrying a small object wrapped carefully in a piece of dark cloth. Marcus noticed immediately. "You're bringing contraband now." Kyreth set the object on the desk. "It is not contraband." "That's exactly what someone bringing contraband would say." She unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a smooth stone, dark blue with thin veins of silver running through it like frozen lightning. Marcus leaned closer. "That's beautiful." "What is it?" "A resonance stone," Kyreth said. "From my homeworld. It was once part of a training arena wall." "You brought a piece of a wall?" "It was destroyed during a storm many cycles ago," she said calmly. "This fragment remained." Marcus picked it up carefully. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. "What does it do?" Kyreth touched the surface lightly. A faint low tone vibrated through the stone, almost too quiet to hear, more felt than heard. "It resonates with certain frequencies," she said. "Some warriors used it to focus their thoughts." Marcus listened to the faint hum. "It sounds like the station engines, but calmer." "Yes." He set it back on the desk. "You're leaving it here?" "Yes." Marcus studied her for a moment, but didn't ask why. Some answers he was learning didn't need to be spoken immediately. Over the following days, the room began to change in small ways. The stone remained on the desk. A narrow strip of fabric bearing geometric patterns appeared draped over the back of one chair. Marcus noticed Kyreth occasionally adjusting its position, with precise care, as if alignment mattered. One evening he pointed at it. Is that decorative or tactical? It is ceremonial, Kyreth said. So, decorative. Kyreth considered this. Yes, Marcus nodded. I approve of decorative tactics. She did not fully understand the joke, but the tone amused her. Their conversations deepened, though they still wandered easily into lighter moments. Marcus attempted to explain the concept of humor built on absurdity, telling her a story about a supply drone that had once delivered a crate of boots to a hydroponics lab and then refused to leave, insisting its delivery was correct. What happened to it? Kyreth asked. They reassigned it to inventory, Marcus said. It was clearly too stubborn for field work. Kyreth tilted her head slightly. That seems logical. Marcus laughed. You're supposed to laugh at that part. I am analyzing it. That's the problem. Despite herself, Kyreth felt a faint warmth of amusement. It was an unfamiliar sensation, like discovering a muscle she had never used before. One evening, Marcus found her standing near the wall projection, watching an image of a forest at dusk. The recording carried the faint sound of insects and distant wind. What are those sounds? She asked. Insects, Marcus said. Very small creatures. Mostly harmless. Mostly. Kyreth listened. There are many of them. On Earth, millions. She turned to him, eyes slightly wider. That seems inefficient. Marcus grinned. Nature doesn't care much about efficiency. Kyreth studied the moving shadows of trees. It must feel alive. It does, Marcus said quietly. Silence settled again, but it felt full rather than empty. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to notice changes in Kyreth that others might have missed. She no longer stood as rigidly at attention when she entered the room. Sometimes she leaned back in the chair, her long ears relaxed instead of angled in constant alertness. Once he even saw her reading without immediately analyzing every sentence, simply letting the words exist. One night she arrived carrying a narrow metallic instrument, no longer than her forearm. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried about that? It is not a weapon, Kyreth said. That's reassuring, but also slightly disappointing. She sat down and touched the surface of the instrument. A soft, flowing tone filled the room. Unlike the piano recordings Marcus usually played, the sound was smooth, almost like wind passing through glass, rising and falling in gentle waves. Marcus listened, surprised. You play? I am learning, Kyreth said. The melody was simple but steady, and when she finished, the silence that followed felt different, as if the room itself were listening. That was beautiful, Marcus said. Kyreth looked slightly uncomfortable. It was imperfect. Everything worth doing is imperfect, Marcus replied. She considered this, then set the instrument carefully beside the resonance stone. One evening as they sat talking, a distant alarm briefly sounded somewhere in the station, then faded. A routine systems test, nothing serious. Neither of them moved. You didn't even flinch, Marcus said. Kyreth looked at him. It was not a combat alarm. You can tell the difference just by the sound? Yes. Marcus shook his head. Remind me never to play cards with you again, or anything else involving probability, strategy, or basic reasoning. That is wise, Kyreth said. Marcus laughed, and this time Kyreth did as well, quietly but unmistakably. The room had become something different now, though neither of them said it aloud. It was no longer Marcus's quarters alone. The stone, the fabric, the instrument, the shared books and quiet evenings had transformed it into something else, something neither of them had planned. A place where the noise of the station seemed distant, a place where time moved differently. That night, as the station lights dimmed to simulate the deep hours of night, Kyreth stood near the door longer than usual. Private Marcus, she said. You know you can just call me Marcus, he replied. She hesitated briefly. Marcus. He smiled faintly. Yes, I will return tomorrow. Marcus nodded. I was hoping you would. Kyreth inclined her head once, then stepped into the corridor. The door closed behind her with its usual quiet hiss. As she walked back toward her own quarters, she realized something that surprised her. For the first time in many years, Her room no longer felt like the only place she belonged, and that realization, more than any battle she had ever fought, felt like the beginning of something she did not yet understand. Rumors began quietly, as most things did aboard the station. At first, they were little more than casual observations exchanged in corridors or mess halls. A technician mentioned seeing the alien commander walking regularly toward the human barracks. A logistics officer noted that Kyreth's schedule, once as predictable as a metronome, now included unexplained gaps in the late cycle. Within a week, speculation had turned into quiet amusement. Marcus first noticed it when he entered the communications deck, and two operators abruptly stopped talking. One of them coughed and pretended to study a console that had clearly been powered off. Marcus leaned on the doorway. "Should I be worried?" "No," one of them said quickly. "We were just discussing supply reports." Marcus glanced at the blank screen. "Ah, yes, the very fascinating topic of invisible supply reports." The operator tried not to laugh. Marcus shook his head and walked away, smiling faintly. Humans, he thought, were incapable of subtlety. Kyreth, on the other hand, noticed the change in a different way. Conversations in hallways paused when she approached. A few soldiers greeted her with expressions that seemed curious rather than respectful. One afternoon, a young cadet gathered enough courage to ask, "Commander, is it true you're studying human literature?" Kyreth looked at him. "Yes." The cadet blinked, clearly expecting denial or a more complicated answer. "Oh." Kyreth continued walking, leaving him staring after her as if she had just admitted to juggling plasma grenades in her spare time. That evening, she arrived at Marcus's quarters carrying a small container. Marcus opened the door and raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned again?" "No," Kyreth said, stepping inside. "It is food." Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "You brought food?" "It is not for combat readiness," she added. "Now I'm suspicious," Marcus said. She opened the container, revealing several small, pale discs arranged in neat rows. They gave off a faint, sweet aroma, unlike anything Marcus had smelled before. "What are they?" he asked. "Travel rations," Kyreth said, "from my people's supply stores. They are designed to sustain warriors during long campaigns." Marcus picked one up cautiously and took a bite. He chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Kyreth asked. Marcus swallowed. "It tastes like someone tried to invent bread, but forgot to make it happy." Kyreth tilted her head. "Explain." "It's, not bad," Marcus said diplomatically. "Just very serious." Kyreth considered this, then took one herself, chewing thoughtfully. "It is efficient." "That's the problem," Marcus said. "Food should occasionally be inefficient." Kyreth did not entirely understand, but she found the idea amusing. They sat together, the quiet music playing softly, the faint hum of the station surrounding them like distant wind. The resonant stone on the desk vibrated gently, its low tone blending with the melody. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You know, people are talking." "Yes," Kyreth said calmly. "That doesn't bother you?" Kyreth considered the question. "It is unfamiliar," she admitted, "but not unpleasant." Marcus nodded. "Good, because I'd hate to think my terrible tea was damaging your reputation." "Your tea is acceptable," Kyreth said. Marcus smiled. "High praise again." They spent the evening reading and talking as usual, but later, as the station lights dimmed, their conversation drifted into deeper waters. Marcus was describing Earth's oceans, trying to explain the scale of waves during storms, when Kyreth said quietly, "I have spent most of my life preparing for battle." Marcus looked at her but said nothing. "There was always another campaign," she continued. "Another mission, another training cycle. Efficiency was everything. Emotion was considered a distraction. And now?" Marcus asked gently. Kyreth looked around the room. The books, the projections, the small scattered objects that now included pieces of her own world. "Now I am uncertain," she said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Uncertainty isn't always a bad thing." Kyreth looked at him. "For a warrior, it can be dangerous." Marcus smiled faintly. "For a person, it can mean you're learning." They sat in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Later, Marcus stood and stretched. I have something to show you. He activated a small projector, and a three-dimensional image appeared above the desk. A rotating model of Earth, blue oceans shimmering, clouds drifting slowly across continents. Kyreth stood, watching the image turn. "This is your world," she said. "Yeah, it is. Beautiful." Marcus nodded. "It is." Kyreth reached out, her fingers passing through the holographic surface. For a moment she said nothing. Then very quietly she said, "I have never seen my own world from orbit." Marcus looked at her surprised. "Really?" "There was no reason," she said. "Warriors are not encouraged to look backward." Marcus studied her expression but didn't press further. Instead, he adjusted the projection, zooming in on a coastline where waves rolled endlessly against pale sand. "That's where I grew up," he said. Kyreth watched the moving water, the shifting light. The image was silent, but she could almost imagine the sound. "It must be peaceful," she said. "Sometimes," Marcus replied. "Sometimes it's loud and messy and full of tourists." Kyreth frowned slightly. "Tourists?" "People who travel to look at things," Marcus explained. Kyreth considered this. "That is an entire profession?" "Several, actually." Kyreth shook her head slowly. "Humans are very strange." Marcus laughed. "We take pride in that." Time passed again without either of them noticing. When Kyreth finally stood to leave, she paused at the door as she always did. But this time, she did not immediately speak. Instead, she looked back at the room, the soft light, the quiet music, the holographic ocean still turning slowly in the air. Then she said, "Marcus, yes, I think I understand something now." "What's that?" Kyreth was silent for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "A warrior fights to protect a world," she said, "but if she never learns what that world feels like, she does not truly know what she is protecting." Marcus didn't reply immediately. He simply nodded. Kyreth inclined her head once and stepped into the corridor. The door closed behind her. As she walked back through the quiet halls of the station, the distant hum of engines surrounding her, she realized that the uncertainty she once feared no longer felt like weakness. It felt like the beginning of a life she had never allowed herself to imagine. The alert came without warning, slicing through the station's artificial night with a sharp change in tone. Lights along the corridors shifted from soft blue to a pulsing amber, and the distant hum of engines deepened as defensive systems activated. Kyreth was already moving before the announcement finished repeating itself in 3 languages. Her body remembered what her mind no longer needed to command. She reached the tactical deck in minutes, her long ears angled forward, senses sharp. Holographic displays bloomed into existence around the room, showing vectors, heat signatures, and the unmistakable outline of an unidentified vessel drifting too close to the station's outer perimeter. "Status," Kyreth said. "Unknown ship," an officer replied. "No response to hails. Power readings fluctuating." Kyreth studied the data. "Not an attack formation," she said. "They are damaged." There was a pause. "You're sure?" "Yes." Orders were given quickly. Interceptor teams launched. Kyreth coordinated calmly, her voice steady, precise. The warrior everyone knew returning effortlessly. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm of command, something else stirred, a strange awareness, as if part of her were watching herself from a distance. Marcus was on the communications deck when the first reports came in. He worked efficiently, relaying data, coordinating signals, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. Still, every so often, his thoughts drifted to Kyreth. He wondered where she was, what decisions she was making, whether she felt the same familiar tightening in her chest that he did whenever alarm sounded. The situation resolved faster than expected. The unidentified vessel turned out to be a long-range survey ship suffering from a navigation failure. No weapons fire, no casualties. The station slowly relaxed, lights returning to their previous calm hue. Kyreth remained on the tactical deck for several minutes after everyone else had begun to disperse. She stared at the fading projections, then exhaled slowly. Without thinking, she turned and walked, not toward her quarters, but toward the human barracks. Marcus was halfway through filing reports when the chime sounded. He looked up. already knowing who it would be. The door slid open and Kyreth stepped inside, her armor still marked faintly with the residue of energy fields, her posture as composed as ever. Marcus smiled faintly. "You're early." "I did not intend to be," she said. "I simply arrived. That's usually how arrival works." She looked at him for a moment longer than usual, then walked into the room. The lights adjusted automatically, the familiar projections flickering to life. The resonant stone hummed softly, as if recognizing her presence. Marcus set the data slate aside. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Kyreth said. Then after a pause, "No." Marcus gestured toward the chair. "That sounds like a longer answer." She sat, slower than usual, and removed part of her armor with practiced ease. The movement felt intimate in the quiet of the room, though neither of them commented on it. "I led the response," and she said. "It was efficient, no errors." "Good," Marcus said. "And yet," she continued, "when it was over, I did not feel complete." Marcus leaned back. "That happens to humans all the time. We usually call it Monday." Kyreth tilted her head. "Explain." "Never mind," Marcus said. "What did you feel?" Kyreth considered. "Relief," she said. "And then disappointment." Marcus frowned slightly. "Disappointment that there wasn't a fight?" "No," Kyreth said. "Disappointment that it ended." Marcus studied her. "Because it reminded you who you were?" Kyreth looked down at her hands. "Because it reminded me who I was trained to be," she corrected. "And I am no longer certain that is all I am." Marcus didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stood and poured tea into 2 cups, handing one to her without asking. She accepted it automatically. They sat in silence for a while, the distant sounds of the station settling back into their steady rhythm. "I walked here instead of to my quarters," Kyreth said quietly. Marcus smiled. "I noticed." "I did not plan to," she added. "Most important decisions aren't planned," Marcus said. "At least not the ones that matter." Kyreth looked around the room. The books, the projections, the small artifacts from both their worlds. "This place," she said, "has become familiar." "That's one way to put it." She met his gaze. "It feels like rest." Marcus's expression softened. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my messy room." "It is no longer messy," Kyreth said seriously. "It is lived in." Marcus laughed. "You realize that's still not a compliment by inspection standards." She allowed herself a small smile. Later, Marcus attempted to lighten the mood by suggesting another card game. Kyreth agreed, on the condition that he choose a game involving minimal probability. "This one is about bluffing," Marcus said. Kyreth stared at the cards. "Deception?" "Strategic deception," Marcus corrected. Kyreth considered this. "I am very good at that." Marcus groaned. "I've made a terrible mistake." They played anyway. Marcus lost spectacularly. At one point, he threw his cards down. "You're impossible." Kyreth looked genuinely concerned. "Is that a negative evaluation?" "No," Marcus said, laughing. "It's admiration disguised as complaint." "I see," she said, clearly not seeing it all. As the hour grew late, the station quiet once more. Kyreth stood and moved toward the projection of Earth's ocean. She watched the endless motion of the waves for a long moment. "In battle," she said, "everything is sharp, defined. Here, everything moves without purpose." Marcus joined her. "It still has purpose, just not one that involves winning." Kyreth turned to him. "Do you ever miss it? The clarity of conflict?" Marcus shrugged. "Sometimes, but clarity can be a cage." She nodded slowly. "Yes." They stood together in silence, not touching, yet close enough to feel the shared warmth of presence. When Kyreth finally turned toward the door, she hesitated again. But this time she did not place her hand on the panel immediately. "Marcus," she said. "Yes?" "If there is another alert," she said carefully, "and I return here afterward, would that be acceptable?" Marcus smiled, gentle and certain. "You don't need an alert for that." Kyreth inclined her head, a gesture that felt less formal than it once had. She stepped into the corridor, the door sliding shut behind her. As she walked away, the hum of the station no longer felt like background noise. It felt like a heartbeat. And for the first time since becoming a warrior, Kyreth understood that strength could exist not only in action, but in the quiet choice of where one went when the battle was over. Time passed aboard the station in the quiet, steady rhythm of orbit. Patrol schedules rotated, supply ships arrived and departed, and distant stars drifted slowly beyond the observation ports. Life continued as it always had, but for Kyreth, everything had changed in ways that were difficult to measure. She still trained each morning. She still attended briefings, still commanded with the same calm precision that had earned her reputation across two fleets. But now when the day's duties ended, she no longer returned automatically to her sterile quarters. Instead, her steps carried her down the familiar corridor to the door she had once entered by accident. Marcus no longer looked surprised when the chime sounded. One evening, she arrived carrying a small case, larger than the items she usually brought. Marcus raised an eyebrow as she set it on the desk. "Should I be worried again?" he asked. "No," Kyreth said. "This is not a weapon. That's becoming a reassuring pattern." She opened the case. Inside lay several thin sheets of translucent crystal, each etched with delicate lines and symbols that shimmered faintly in the light. "What are those?" Marcus asked. "Memory plates," Kyreth said. "They contain recordings from my homeworld." Marcus leaned closer. "You're sharing those with me?" "Yes." She activated one of the plates. A three-dimensional projection filled the room, not of a battlefield, but of a vast valley beneath twin suns. Tall structures of pale stone rose in the distance, their surfaces carved with flowing designs. Wind moved across fields of silver grass, bending them in slow rhythmic waves. Marcus stared. "That's, incredible." "This is where I trained," Kyreth said quietly, "and where I once believed I would spend my entire life." They watched the image in silence for a while. Then Marcus said gently, "It's beautiful." "Yes," Kyreth said. "I did not notice that before." The words lingered between them, carrying more meaning than she intended to explain. Over the following weeks, the room continued to change, not dramatically, but in ways that made it feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a shared space. Marcus added a second chair near the desk that matched the first. Kyreth adjusted the lighting to a softer tone that reminded her of her world's evening sky. Books began to appear stacked in two neat piles instead of one. One day, Marcus found her attempting to sketch one of the projected landscapes on a sheet of paper. He looked at the drawing. "Is that supposed to be the ocean?" "Yes. It looks like a tactical map." Kyreth studied the page. "I see your point." Marcus grinned. "Don't worry. My first attempts at drawing looked like collapsing buildings." "That is reassuring," Kyreth said solemnly. They laughed, and the sound felt natural now, no longer surprising to either of them. The rumors aboard the station eventually faded, replaced by other concerns, other conversations. Soldiers grew accustomed to the sight of Kyreth walking through the human sector, just as they had once grown accustomed to her silent presence on the tactical deck. What had seemed unusual slowly became ordinary. One afternoon, the cadet who had once asked about literature approached her again. "Commander," he said hesitantly, "is it true you're teaching a small discussion group now?" "Yes," Kyreth said. The cadet blinked. "Discussion about books?" "Yes." He looked as if he had just witnessed a star change direction. Kyreth continued walking, almost smiling. That evening, she arrived at Marcus's quarters later than usual. He looked up from his desk. "Long day." "Yes," she said, sitting down. "I was explaining poetry to 3 engineers." Marcus winced. "That sounds dangerous." "One of them attempted to calculate the probability of metaphor," Kyreth said. Marcus burst out laughing. "And?" "I told him it was incalculable." "Good answer." They sat together in comfortable silence, the projection of the ocean moving slowly on the wall, the resonance stone humming faintly on the desk. Outside, the distant stars shone steadily, indifferent to the small lives unfolding within the station. After a while, Marcus said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't opened that door?" Kyreth considered. "Yes. And I would still be efficient," she said. "And incomplete." Marcus nodded, understanding more than the words alone expressed. Kyreth looked around the room. The books, the instruments, the memory plates, the quiet evidence of two lives gradually intertwining without force or urgency. I once believed strength meant enduring everything alone, she said. Now I understand that strength can also mean allowing change. Marcus smiled faintly. Humans usually need decades to figure that out. Kyreth tilted her head slightly. Then I am learning quickly. Later, as the station lights dimmed and the artificial night settled over the corridors, Kyreth stood by the door as she often did. But this time, she did not reach for the panel immediately. Marcus, she said. Yes? I have requested a reassignment of quarters. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Closer to this sector? Yes, he smiled. That seems practical. Yes, Kyreth said. Then after a pause, she added, and desirable. Marcus nodded, and neither of them felt the need to say more. Kyreth stepped into the corridor, but instead of turning toward her old quarters, she walked in the opposite direction, toward a new section of the station where her future living space was being prepared. The corridor lights glowed softly, reflecting off the polished floor, and the steady hum of the station surrounded her like a familiar song. For the first time in her life, she was not walking toward duty or away from danger. She was simply walking forward. And she knew, with quiet certainty, that she was no longer the warrior who had entered the wrong door by accident. She was someone who had chosen to stay,